While the world watches the Middle East, while Congress debates another foreign aid package, while cable news cycles through the same manufactured outrage, Moscow just executed a move in Venezuela that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Western Hemisphere, not with missiles, not with invasion, with something far more dangerous, structural leverage. And Washington is pretending it didn't happen. This isn't speculation. This isn't geopolitical theater. This is the moment a superpower positioned itself in America's backyard in a way that cannot be undone by sanctions, rhetoric, or diplomatic pressure. And the scariest part, the mechanisms that allowed this to happen are still running. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jonathan. Let's start with what you've probably heard, because understanding the official story is essential to seeing why it's incomplete. The mainstream analysis goes something like this. Russia has maintained influence in Venezuela for years. Maduro is a Russian client. Venezuela has oil. This is just part of the broader US-Russia competition for global dominance. Venezuela is unstable, authoritarian, economically broken, but it's a known problem, managed, understood, and on the surface, that's not wrong. Russian military advisors have been in Venezuela. Russian planes have landed in Caracas. Russian investment has flowed into Venezuelan energy projects. But here's where the narrative collapses. Treating this as a continuation of existing patterns blinds you to what actually just shifted. The assumption embedded in mainstream analysis is that these relationships are transactional. Russia provides military support and maintains a client state as a counterweight to American influence. That's Cold War thinking. That's assuming Russia's goal is symmetrical competition with the United States. It isn't anymore. Russia has moved from influence in Venezuela to structural dependency of Venezuela on Russian systems. Think about what this means in concrete terms. Venezuela's military, not just its leadership, but its actual operational capacity, is now integrated with Russian defense systems, Russian training protocols, and Russian intelligence infrastructure. When you deploy Russian S-300 air defense systems, you don't just get a weapon, you get a relationship. That system requires Russian maintenance, it requires Russian spare parts, it requires Russian technical expertise that no other nation can easily replicate or replace. The oil industry, Venezuela's only real asset, is being rehabilitated through Russian energy companies. Rosneft operates refineries. Russian technicians work the fields. The infrastructure, the expertise, the logistics, all threaded through Moscow. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Venezuela is also becoming logistically critical to Russia itself. A Venezuela integrated into Russian systems becomes a forward position, not militarily, not yet, but logistically, economically, informationally. It's a foothold in a hemisphere the United States considered secure. It's a pressure point, and unlike Syria, unlike Belarus, Venezuela is geographically close to American territory, American interests, and American allies. The real danger isn't Russian aggression in Venezuela. The real danger is that Washington is still operating under the assumption that this is a competition it can win through pressure, sanctions, or diplomatic recognition of opposition figures. It can't, because Moscow didn't come to Venezuela to win. It came to make losing too expensive for anyone else. Let me explain how this actually works, because the mechanism is what matters. The United States has spent decades assuming that its power in Latin America comes from economic leverage, trade agreements, investment, the dollar, access to markets. That worked when America was the only serious player offering those things. It worked when regional powers didn't have alternatives, but Russia didn't come to Venezuela offering capitalism. It came offering something simpler, no conditions. China does this in Africa. Russia is doing it in Venezuela. The offer is straightforward. We will keep your government functioning. We will supply your military. We will buy your resources. We don't care about your democracy, your human rights record, or your governance structure. We just want strategic positioning. Compare that to the American approach: sanctions, demands for elections, support for opposition movements, pressure on regional allies. The American approach assumes leverage. The Russian approach assumes that leverage doesn't matter if the alternative is collapse. And here's the mechanism that Washington keeps missing. Every time the United States pressures Venezuela, every time it tightens sanctions, every time it supports regime change efforts, it pushes Venezuela deeper into Russian dependency, because for Maduro, for the military, for the ruling structure in Caracas, Russia represents survival, not prosperity, not legitimacy, just survival. The United States is essentially paying for Russian integration of Venezuela by making isolation the cost of independence. This is where the narrative really breaks down. The people running American foreign policy still believe they're playing a game where they control the board. They don't. The board has moved. The pieces are in different positions, and every move they make based on the old map drives reality further from their expectations. So what does a Venezuela structurally integrated into Russian systems actually mean? First, it means the hemisphere's security architecture is no longer what Washington assumes it is. The Monroe Doctrine, the principle that the Western Hemisphere is America's sphere of influence, is no longer operative. It's being openly challenged by a peer power, and America's response has been ineffective enough that Russia is doubling down rather than retreating. Second, it changes the cost of American military intervention in Latin America. If the United States were to intervene militarily in Venezuela, and let's be clear, that's not happening, but if it were, it would be facing not a local military, but a military integrated with Russian systems, Russian intelligence, Russian operational doctrine. That's not a regional problem anymore. That's a great power confrontation. Third, and this is what keeps being overlooked, a Russian integrated Venezuela becomes a platform for Russian activity across the region: Nicaragua, Colombia, the Caribbean. These aren't independent moves, they're nodes in a network, and that network is expanding while Washington watches. The fourth piece is the one that really matters for the future. It establishes a precedent. Other regional powers, Brazil is watching this, Mexico is watching this. They're learning that American promises of investment and partnership come with conditions, while Russian offers come with no questions asked. That's not sustainable for American influence in the region. And finally, creates a genuine vulnerability in American security planning. Venezuela isn't just a South American country, it's on America's doorstep. It's where your intelligence systems have to work. It's where your naval operations plan around. It's where your alliance structure in the region gets stressed. So if nothing changes, what actually happens? In the immediate term, Russia consolidates more military integration, more economic integration. Venezuela becomes more firmly locked into Russian systems, because the longer this goes on, the more expensive it becomes to leave. In the medium term, this becomes a chronic problem for American strategy, not an acute crisis, a chronic constraint. Every Latin American policy has to account for the fact that Venezuela is no longer a variable in American calculations. It's a Russian variable. In the longer term, this is about competing visions of how the world is organized. The United States is offering a rules-based international order that requires democratic norms, human rights commitments, transparent. Russia is offering a power-based order where survival and autonomy matter more than legitimacy. In Venezuela, the power-based order is winning. America cannot fix this through pressure. Sanctions won't work because Venezuela is already destroyed economically. Diplomacy won't work because Russia's goal isn't negotiation, it's structural integration. Regime change won't work because any regime that replaces Maduro without Russian support will face the same question: Do I align with the power that offers survival or the power that offers conditions? Washington didn't see this coming because it still operates under the assumption that its economic and military power is sufficient to maintain its sphere of influence. That assumption is being tested and it's failing. This isn't a story about Russia's genius or America's incompetence. This is a story about how power actually redistributes in the world, quietly, deliberately, through mechanisms that don't show up in cable news segments. Venezuela will not be a military threat to the United States, but it will be a permanent constraint on American power in a hemisphere it used to dominate. It will be a staging ground for Russian influence across Latin America. It will be proof that the American system of leverage based on economic integration and institutional pressure doesn't work against powers that have nothing to lose and everything to gain from isolation. This isn't the end of the story, but it may be the end of the illusion that American power in Latin America is stable or secure. The question isn't whether Washington will respond. The question is whether any response at this point can undo what's already been built.